Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Railnatter. It's a pre-record because it's the National Rail Awards tonight. More on that later. Although the bonus episode tonight will be me wandering around, doing a little bit of a what the hell is it, what goes on, how is it useful for me as a mildly disruptive activist to be involved in such things, and I will talk those subscribing to the bonus through that. Tonight, hello everyone. Tonight we'll be going through the Joined Up Policies, Joined Up Journeys highlights report from NCAT, the National Centre for Accessible Transport. We'll also talk a little bit about who they are. But yes, if you are a £5 and above Patreon subscriber, well, firstly, thank you to all of the Patreon subscribers, but if you're a £5 and above Patreon subscriber, you will get the bonus later, and all of you are what make this episode and all of the others like it possible. Thank you to the Patreon subscribers. Without further ado, everyone, welcome to tonight's Railnatter. And as the InCity 225 fades away, well, this is a bit of a kind of a two-part little mini-series, this one. So, way back in episode 31, we did the first level boarding episode, went into detail about that. We've had the chance of 5 years of progress, and to some extent there has been progress as we went through last week. We actually won a very significant battle. We talked about that last week. This week, we're going to be talking about NCAT, the National Centre for Accessible Transport. This is a body that sits kind of a collaboration between the transport charity Motability. They made a major fund, a kind of a major contribution to Coventry University. Their kind of national design centre centred around research done by disabled people into the challenges around disabled transport. Indeed, they kind of kicked off in I think January 2023. Yeah, there we go. 20 million quid awarded to Coventry University to improve transport for people with disabilities. So kind of an evidence centre that builds up evidence, looks at the challenges, and then attempts to kind of find policy, kind of practical policy proposals that can allow, that can make positive change for disabled travellers. And this report that we're going to be looking at kind of goes into a reasonable amount of detail as part of their ongoing work. This is an ongoing process. This is the latest highlights report where they've picked up and kind of qualified their findings. And we will go through those and see what their consequent proposals are. And here it is, Joined Up Policies, Joined Up Journeys, NCAT's latest report. As it says later, it should be read in conjunction, ideally, with their report from 2024. We're going to go through this highlights report, pick out the key findings, have a think about what we can do about them, and then also go through some of the policy proposals. So it's an accessible document, which means it's kind of nice and open. So lots of nice open space, well-spaced text, not a huge number of images. So the first kind of key point is, why did we do this work? Why did NCAT do this work? Disabled people make 38% fewer journeys than non-disabled people, a trend that has persisted for over a decade. So it's pointing out that, the story for disabled travellers is pretty much grimly the same now as it was 10 years ago, which is completely unacceptable. Outside of England, most UK transport policy making has devolved to regional administrations. The UK transport system is clearly failing disabled people. So there are differences between the different devolved nations, but a UK-wide overview of the key challenges is useful, but also they address each nation separately. So that there's kind of there is a useful granularity in terms of how the report has been structured in terms of proposals for policy change. What do we do? How do we do it? And who did we work with? So this is kind of going through the fact there was a scoping stage, they had policy roundtables, and then a call for evidence. So developing the scope was done with disabled people's organisations, advisory panels, and transport professionals. There was a call for evidence. Call for evidence, kind of a design of the actual call for evidence, then the dissemination of that call for evidence, and then a sizable chunk of respondents. And the analysis of that was then grouped around the nation, so around England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and also UK-wide themes as well. And then there were the policy roundtables. So 5 evidence sessions that were chaired by parliamentarians on the Accessible Transport Policy Commission, bringing together 78 disabled people, organisations, professionals and policymakers. Again, split and split with its various geographical focuses. So through all of those, so the roundtables in Wales, chaired by Tanni Grey-Thompson, Lord Shinquin in England, Richard Baker MP in Scotland, Sorcha Eastwood in Ireland, and Baroness Brinton hosted the UK-wide regulation-focused policy roundtable, which included the various regulating bodies. What's interesting, actually, is that the Welsh one had 8 people, the English one had 25 people, and the Scottish one had 17 people. So like a difference in interest between in Northern Ireland and Wales in this compared to in England and Scotland, which I found that interesting. When I flicked through this earlier, I thought that was an interesting point to pick up. So let's go. We're going to go through these findings again at the end to remind ourselves, but we're going to go through the 5 findings of what they discovered and kind of explore what these challenges are, and also, frankly, how they tie into the bigger Railnatter thesis. All of these are things that the drums that we've been banging for a really long time. So finding 1 is that the UK lacks a coherent, inclusive transport strategy and coordination across the nations. Yep, no plan. Absolutely. So, the little quote they give here is, transport isn't just transport, it's the economy, employment, planning, housing, health, the arts and culture. It's the thread through all. Yep, they get it. Absolutely. And, so you get different concessionary travel schemes, different eligibility, discounts, obvious underfunding causing a lack of, overall underfunding in transport systems invariably hits disabled people harder because disability upgrades are often seen as a nice to have rather than absolute business as usual, necessary core to any scope. Fundamental problems. Finding 2, slightly different. Seamless door-to-door journeys are hindered by a lack of integration between different transport modes and services. So disabled people often having to rely on different modes, joining the dots to get from A to B. But the integration between them creates major obstacles. Journey information, street infrastructure, uncoordinated transport schedules. This is intensified for those who cannot easily arrange alternatives, such as deaf passengers needing taxis during cancellations or those in rural areas. Yeah, this is a key one. We have a fragmented transport system. Transport is not considered in totality, it's considered in little bits. There are bus companies, train companies, and within that, there are different bus companies and different train companies, let alone the integration across all those other modes as well. As Lucy Vallis from the chief exec of Possibility People says, policies fail to ensure seamless accessibility across the entire journey, including from home to the station and back again. So a more holistic approach like integrating local transport services like buses, taxis and cycling schemes should be included in accessibility plans. Finding 3, accessible transport standards are fragmented and limited. There's another word I would use to replace fragmented and limited, but yeah. Accessibility standards inconsistent across transport sectors. Rail and aviation have clearer guidelines and monitoring. Sectors like buses and street infrastructure lack enforceable standards. Places the burden on disabled passengers to navigate different systems with limited clarity or support. And without standards, costly retrofitting becomes necessary. So Deborah Preston, Access Advisor at Liverpool City Region Command Authority, there needs to be a minimised set of standards for accessible transport and needs to ensure that no matter where you travel to throughout the UK, all transport routes and means of transport are accessible. Absolutely. Finding 4. The lack of co-production in decision-making processes often leads to accessibility being treated as an afterthought. Disabled people are frequently excluded from decision-making processes that shape transport policy and infrastructure. Local and national access groups vary in power and permanence, creating inconsistency. Many disabled people report being consulted after decisions are made and for years without seeing any change. Without formal structures, funding and accountability, disabled people's input is undervalued and their expertise underutilised. So Claire Walters from Bus Users UK says, we keep talking about nothing about us without us, but everything seems to happen without us half the time, and we only find out afterwards. We need to have a statutory right to information at the early stage rather than a consultation once they've made up their mind about what it is they want to do and are just ticking the box. Absolutely. And I'm afraid I've seen that in my day job, in my previous day jobs, constantly. Afterthought, not first thought. Finding 5. Transport regulators don't have enough powers, capacity, and visibility to fulfill their responsibilities around accessibility. Transport regulation. Regulators, toothless. Yeah, this is a key one. Some regulators can fine providers, but others rely on public pressure. The public perception of regulators is often negative, with many seeing them as ineffective or complicit in inaccessible practices. Ouch. Many regulators lack engagement with disabled people and capacity. In Northern Ireland, disabled people have fewer legal protections due to outdated legislation. Double ouch. Yeah, quite. Matt Harrison from the Thomas Pocklington Trust says regulators need to work more closely with those affected. It should be a requirement that providers hold access panels that request feedback from various groups, and that this evidence is shared with the regulatory bodies themselves. So yeah, regulators almost useless when it comes to accessibility. So from that point, those conclusions of key findings of what the problems are, those are our 5 reasons why it's, completely. But how do you come to conclusions from that? Where do you go from that? And that's where the report is useful, because these conclusions are building to a process of policy change, things that should be different. So, strategy, funding, standards, enforcement, co-production, coordination, integration are all crucial elements of accessible transport. Without one, the others cannot achieve transport accessibility. It's key that all of these things are tied together. And this is kind of where they talk about, right, how do we get to the conclusions we're coming to? So there's a 1-page conclusion here, transport accessibility must become consistent across nations and modes, allowing disabled people to make seamless door-to-door journeys. This can be best achieved through a standardization of transport accessibility practices and integration of transport. Oh, wait. So politics is not, things about ownership and structure and integration are not somehow distinct from people's livelihoods, as if it's some like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's only about which team wins. Interesting. Crucially, every stage of transport policy making, planning, delivery, and evaluation must be co-produced with disabled people. Structural change must be supported by cultural change by shifting policymakers' view of disabled people as a burden and by recognising disabled people as a key part of society. Absolutely. Not second-class citizens, which I'm afraid is how transport currently treats disabled people. So, what needs to happen? What should happen next? This is fundamentally where we see that there is a series of proposals as to what needs to be done, and also, crucially, how, or rather, along what timeline they should be delivered. And it's also split by region. So we start with England, and we start with, they've put the responsibility squarely at the lead organisation responsible, which in the case of England is Department for Transport, the DFT. Year 1, strategy, foundations and co-production. The forthcoming integrated national transport strategy, what's that, and will we ever see it? I hope so, should announce a plan to develop an accessible transport framework to be delivered as part of the strategy. Should be co-produced with disabled people's organisations and the Transport Advisory Committee, Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee, informed by the findings of the Transport Select Committee's Access Denied report. We'll also go through that. In parallel with this, that isn't going to be next week, but it'll be soon. It'll be part 3 of this, I suspect. And there should be a ministerial task force across departments to deliver the strategy. Commission a review of accessible transport standards on design and service. And work with local government sector to develop a local accessible transport charter that commits local authorities to appointing a disabled people's champion, to transport public decision, transport decision-making bodies, establishing an advisory accessibility panel. We have one in the railway. It's called the BEAP, Built Environment Accessibility Panel, and it's very good, but it's not used enough, and they're also extremely stretched. Chaired by a councillor composed of disabled people and disabled people's organisations, embedding technical and service standards produced by the proposed Accessible Transport Standards Commission. So then years 2 to 3 is reform, standards and delivery. So this is when you set up the Accessible Transport Standards Commission to update and create standards and own them, I would hope, in various priority areas. Invite devolved nations to participate in the Commission, develop a practice of ongoing review of accessible transport standards, and establish a UK-wide disability transport task force. Propose and consult the reform of the Equality Act 2010. I mean, yeah, definitely. To strengthen regulation, in particular improving its transport provisions. Improve regulatory practices, so require regulatory bodies to publish plain language annual reviews of their accessibility enforcement activity. Pilot financial penalty frameworks for non-compliance. Years 4 to 5 is where where they want to see transparency and evaluation. So conduct an England-specific review of the impact of the change that they've seen, that they've proposed, and then publish an annual accessibility enforcement and compliance summary. So, and this will be the themes across the organisations. You'll see similar, shaped based on the slight differences in kind of legal framework and legislative framework in the different countries, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But you'll see it's a similar story. So, yeah, you can see as you go through. So it's established the National Accessibility Advisory Panel in Scotland. Again, year 1 is about strategy and co-production. So getting disabled people involved as the strategy is developed. So yeah, in Wales, you've got the National Accessibility Advisory Panel, which will be established to advise ministers, integrate the Disability Rights Task Force Working Group for travels, recommendations, and the Accessible Transport Plan. Yeah, basically integrating those into the proposed plans. Was I avoiding pronouncing Llwybr there? Yes, I was. Years 2 to 3, standards is change those standards, and then year 4 to 5, evaluation and enforcement. You start seeing the pattern, which is co-produce a strategy, develop the right standards accordingly, and then evaluate and enforce. So Transport Scotland, again, coordinate, co-produce, see that this is in line with the National Transport Strategy 2. Again, the different nations have their different processes. Standards and coordination. In this case, the coordination is kind of key to coordinate across boundaries and evaluate and enforce. In Northern Ireland, things slightly different. The key one in Northern Ireland is the legislation is outdated because of the difference in legislative structure in Northern Ireland versus the rest of the UK. So, publish an inclusive transport strategy for Northern Ireland. That's the number 1 bullet point. Number 2, set up more community accessibility panels at the district council level linked to rural partnerships. 3, establish a cross-departmental ministerial task force on accessible transport. Years 2 to 3, reform standards and delivery. So this is the key one, is the need to reform the outdated Disability Discrimination Act. So this should be led by the Department for Communities. Introduce protection from indirect discrimination. It's baffling that the EA wasn't mapped across into Northern Ireland. Absolutely baffling. Things like the definition of reasonable adjustments not included. It's staggering that I mean, much like other things like abortion rights and other things, that there's this gap in Northern Ireland. It's just not acceptable. It's staggering, really. And then we get to the part where it kind of coalesces with the rest of the UK, where you have enforcement and evaluation. Now, what here is okay. So what? So these findings, how is NCAT going to achieve change for disabled people's transport? Well, as a UK-wide centre, the plan is for basically to kind of push government to pursue this roadmap and tie it in. I'm interested to see exactly. In its next phase, NCAT will be conducting applied research to develop co-production training frameworks and improving complaints processes. What I want to see is this being picked up by government. If not by government, then the Greens should be picking this document up and saying, we will do this. These are things we will do absolutely as part of it. But government, as a minimum, the Department for Transport and the Secretary of State should be picking this up and saying, we will do this. I've seen no such statement. And there's a little bit about NCAT at the end there. So that's the nice report, including those who have supported it. So Coventry University, Catapult, Designability, Policy Connect, RIDC, which is the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers, not the Railway Innovation Development Centre, WSP as a design consultancy, and Motability as the funder of the overall bulk of the research. And some references there. So you have the report. It's fairly neat, fairly compact. It gives some quite clear and broad instructions. I'd say it lacks some specifics, but I think rightly so for the type of document that it is. It's broad enough that government could just say, yes, we'll do this. Will they? I would love them to, but it doesn't seem like they are going to be doing that. Fingers crossed. But the call to action is, government, pick this up, run with it. Like, you can do that right now. and should be as well. One thing I want to do now is actually go through some of those findings and have a little bit of a think about each in turn. So, finding one is the lack of the UK lacks coherent, inclusive transport strategies and coordination across nations. There is no plan, and this is true. So this is true for transport as a whole. Key thing here is do that. We're supposed to have this integrated national transport strategy. There's no evidence it's ever going to exist. I've not heard anything about it from behind the scenes, and I worry significantly about what it's going to look like, how viable it's going to be, whether it's going to be real. Given all of the rubbish we've seen on transport policy so far from this government, I'm extremely worried about that. And the lack of a plan about anything, let alone disabled access, is just making transport awful and more kind of challenging for anyone to use, let alone disabled people. So that's it's a key finding, and it's relevant across the board, frankly. The response is government needs to actually have a plan. It needs to have a plan, and frankly, to have a plan, it needs to set an ambition for mode share, because you cannot, without a mission, you can't have a plan. You need a mission. Government has no mission. It has no objectives. It has no ideology, frankly. It just is smooth business's ego and also Trump's ego, and hope that makes our economy better, which is not a plan, frankly. Finding 2 is about transport integration, and there isn't any. It's just the point. There is no transport integration other than in places like TfL, where you have a much improved service. Manchester's attempting to resolve it, but basically there is no transport integration. And even in London, the standards across bus, tram, train, underground are so wildly varied. There is a much greater coherence than anywhere else. Wales is probably second in the charge on this, but obviously all their bus services are still fragmented and in bits, as are the rail services. So there's to a lesser extent, buses are still a major problem in Wales. Rail, for the most part, you have TfW Rail, and they are introducing new and partially accessible fleets. So there is progress on that front, but yeah, not enough. But for England, catastrophic. Scotland, a real mess. Obviously, the buses in Scotland completely atomised. No, there needs to be substantial improvement in integration across transport. If it isn't wholesale renationalisation of our buses, which we need to be doing, then at the bare minimum it is, bus company, you want to run this, you want to continue earning this and not get nationalised, then you'll do exactly as we say. You'll brand your buses exactly as we tell you to. You will build the inside of the buses exactly as we tell you to, defined by standards that will be set and produced by disabled people in collaboration with industry, not industry thinking it's doing what it thinks it knows best. Frankly, the creation of the 777s, the Merseyrail train fleet, is a good example of how to do it. You have the problem statement and bring disabled people in right off the bat and understand what their needs are and how to fulfill them. Finding number 3, transport standards. They are bad. If they exist at all, they're really poor. And they are siloed and don't consider integration across modes. Again, tying to the previous one. Yeah, really fundamental that the standards are set correctly and work. Finding number 4, lack of co-production decision-making processes. This one is about democracy. This is absolutely true for disabled people. I don't want to water down the fact that very specifically disabled people aren't involved in the story. But there's we'll get to the kind of one of the key points here. But there's 2 sides to this. One is a total lack of democracy, and so for any transport decision making, there is not enough involvement of communities of people. They're seen as an afterthought to deal with the consultation, rather than being like, we have this idea for the ambition about what our mission is, what our targets are. How would you, society, how would you, communities, want to fulfill those? How do you think that would work best? Give us your ideas, and then therefore we will get your buy-in. Absolutely true across the board for transport, not just for disabled people. But the other thing, of course, is a complete lack of diverse teams. If you don't have teams that represent the not just about bringing all disabled people and disabled people's organizations in, but also just having diverse teams to think of this stuff in the first place. A lack of diversity means that we cannot deliver for the society we live in, whether it's designing railways, whether it's delivering a service, no matter what it is. If you don't have a diverse team, the needs of the society we're supposed to be serving are never going to be properly met. And then the 5th finding is utterly toothless regulators. And why would you have a regulator that has teeth? Because then they're going to be an inconvenience. They're going to press government. If you have a regulator that has teeth, it can force government to spend money. And that's what government doesn't want to do. So why would you have a regulator that has any power? Interesting. So yeah, a key finding that is true, not just for, again, as ever, with all of these are not just true findings for disabled people, they apply across the board. Not that we should be watering down how critical these specific findings are for disabled people. It's a real bloody mess, frankly. Now, one of the things that comes out is the need for the key transport, the transport bodies that have responsibility for this ultimately are the DfT for England and for the UK at large in some elements, Transport Scotland in Scotland, the Department for Infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and Transport for Wales in Wales. The things they have to do, the policy changes they have to make, are laid out very clearly. It is to it is to create the strategy and co-produce that strategy. Is usually the first year. Years 2, 3, 4 are to then develop standards and to roll out the change, to consult and to roll out the change, and then 5 is to evaluate, to enforce the change and to evaluate the change. So within 5 years, we should have been in a better place. We can be in a better place. That's 5 years we could be resolving this, even if the big physical, expensive stuff we need to do isn't happening. At least having those enforceable standards and enforceable workarounds might start knocking some heads together as to what needs to change. Now, as we go into some news, it's I'm afraid this is exactly what we're talking about, because there's one particular story that I think is really important to pick up on that just typifies the extent to which disabled people and their needs are seen as a nice to have. There was a vote related to the bus services bill, and there was a proposal to remove the time limits. So that's the time of day where disabled people do not have their entitled access to public transport, their discounted access. So it was rejected. There was a proposal to lift this. And the quote from the relevant minister was answering a written question earlier this year. I think is it Simon Lightwood? Someone can shout at me if that's wrong. Mr. Lightwood, MP, said any changes to the basically to the scheme, the concessionary travel scheme, would need to be, and I quote, carefully considered for its impact on the scheme's financial sustainability. So that's rather than it's do the right thing that makes sense for disabled people. It's maybe we can't afford it. It's like afterthought. And so it's also simultaneously with all of the other hits that government is making on disabled people's access to rights, dignity, welfare, and their ability to function, to be part of our society. On the one hand, Labour are going, disabled people, they don't want to work. They don't only go to work. They should be going to work. And on the other hand, this is as Rachel Charlton Daly has pointed out on the old Twitter sphere. Also, Labour, disabled people don't need to get a bus before 9:30 a.m. actually. So it's like when disabled people might be travelling to do some work, they're not going to have their concessionary bus travel that makes their life accounts for the fact that their lives are that much harder. And the society, concessionary bus travel wouldn't need to provide concessions for bus travel if we'd built a society where people who are disabled could travel the same as us. That you wouldn't need the point is that we have built our society to be extremely prejudiced against disabled people, hence the model of disability from the environment, and therefore we need to make remove that as a cost, given that the cost burden of travel is so much higher for disabled people. That's why concessionary travel exists. And Labour are saying, but if you're working, we're not going to acknowledge the fact that we built a society and that the society has been built that makes it impossible for you to live your lives close to normally. No, what we're going to do is continue to make you have to pay for your bus. Really hypocritical and obvious lack of coordination of government thinking here. I mean, there isn't. The point is cruelty. The point is, no, actually, we want to just reject disabled people from society. That's kind of basically been the kind of the collective belief from government for over a decade, as we've seen from what NCAT have actually said about the improvements for disabled people in transport. There have been none. Other interesting news is that, let's talk about driverless cars again. Waymo gets its first permit to test autonomous vehicles in New York City. Well, they've probably got about 2 roads and maybe 1 or 2 blocks where they can run. As ever, this is a classic Eric Adams sort of mayoral, isn't it great that Waymo are here, even though their ability to run is extremely limited. And a reminder, they have someone behind a remote control who can pick up the car the moment it has something it doesn't like, which is, as with Waymo currently in operation, extremely frequently. Data that the data is not published, and whenever we get a glimpse of that data by accident, when Google or Alphabet or whatever release it, we realize that the interventions by the minimum wage driver worker is extremely frequent. These things don't work, and they're doing so in very limited conditions. They're not allowed on highways, bad weather, they're not allowed to run, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so hooray, autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, marvelous. The other thing, of course, is that the main proponent of driverless car technologies are the people who, the organization that claims to be at the front of the charge regularly, Tesla. It isn't, but that is the claim being made, has actually now basically given up on the promise of vehicle autonomy entirely, having redefined what their fully self-driving technology actually means. That definition has been altered. It's now just what they describe as a driver advisory system, without any promise of unsupervised self-driving in the future. So yeah, electric.co picked that up quite nicely. Well worth going into the details of that. Fred Lambert kind of going into some of the fiddly details. Of course, this is related because Tesla is just a get Musk rich quick scheme. It is related to his ridiculous compensation scheme, because his compensation is tied directly to how many vehicles with FSD get sold. Blah 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 blah. A grim situation, but yeah, this is the bubble beginning to burst in extreme slow motion, but it's happening. The driverless car hype, just like the LLM AI hype, is going pop. However, not enough for The Economist, because you better believe that The Economist is going, robo-taxis will be the Sputnik moment for a declining Europe. The idea that having driverless taxis driving around is somehow going to save transport, and that it's a thing that that if we don't, as Europe, import from the US, it's going to be collapse and decline. Obviously, this is some of the most stupid journalism you can possibly imagine from someone who apparently has never got a train, or got on the Paris metro. Staggering levels of utterly supine stupidity. Someone who has clearly been to too many nice fancy dinners with driverless car and tech kind of industry folks. Yeah, this is obviously junk, but they get these sorts of stories get relentlessly published all the time, despite the ridicule from everyone that always comes along. And then you get all sorts of people going on Twitter going, well, actually, this anyone who says, there's some twerp recently, some tech nerd twerp going, actually, the trains are bad, and this obsession with delivering trains is actually really harmful. It's like, no, what? The point is that they're good, and what you're describing is hell. I know, I wrote a book about it. And of course, the reality in Europe, as much as anywhere else, is that the one thing we are importing from car culture in the US is the increasing size of the vehicles. Safety and space at risk as SUVs reach 30% of the car market in English cities. Researchers warn 30% of the market, a third almost of cars being SUVs. I took a photo of one recently that was, the Amarok, is it? This enormous sort of VW pickup thing. It's just the height of the pickup bit and the nose was as high as the top of the Panda, and the top of the Panda is like high enough for like a 9-year-old child to be invisible, let alone, my 2-year-old. Just appalling. Cars are destroying everything, and we should have fewer of them by a substantial margin. And we should be changing the law. The point of this is that there are considerations for changing the law to exclude SUVs from cities, but we should be changing the law and regulations to exclude SUVs from existence. They don't need to exist. There is no need for the majority of these types of vehicles to exist. Certainly pickups, big pickups like the Amarok, that's a vehicle that if our law does not exclude that vehicle from existing, then the law is not correct. And there is no argument to say, well, you need that vehicle. That vehicle has only existed in the UK for 5 years. So what did all of our society do before that? Maybe we should rethink how we define and allow individuals to move stuff around, if that's the only way they can move it around. Maybe that thinks about bigger questions of municipal logistics that we should maybe be considering. I wonder. And of course, this is not confined to the UK when it comes to European car madness. Some of ultra conservatives, but it gives you an idea of where the right are pulling the Overton window. The German Bavarian ultra conservative Söder just published like a extremely vigorously pro sort of fossil fuel and car manifesto in 10 points. Yes to car country Germany. We were doing this until very recently. Not only was Rishi Sunak doing this, Mark Harper, etc., but Labour did a manifesto, a plan for cars, plan for drivers type situation as well. So, this is not we're all doing this in Europe. It's a real mess. And if we don't, the cars have already ruined everything, and we're going to let them ruin everything to the point where there's nothing left to ruin. Bad news. Of course, from a driverless cars perspective, you can go back to the episode where Vicky and I went through why driverless cars will never exist, and the news continues to just back us up on this one. Good times. It was also a fun episode. Definitely go watch it. Now, very brief few little items here. One of the kind of fairly depressing ones is the amount of spend government is giving or letting Network Rail make out in the industry has reduced by about 10% in the last decade. So, a fairly substantial fall in expenditure, 16% reduction in renewals, and a 9 to 10% reduction in workforce size, so in headcount in the industry. 10% of our workforce nearly being made redundant, disappearing in the last, or retiring in the last 10 years. That's frightening at a time when, as I keep pointing out, we need to be doing more railways. We need double the amount of mode share. That's double the amount of railway going on in terms of how much we move people and things on our railways, and yet we're reducing the amount we spend and the amount with the number of people employed. Absolutely frightening. Other news, relatedly, by the way, meanwhile, climate change is doing exactly what we said it would. Just normal stuff like the day after tomorrow plot becoming closer and closer to reality, which is that the AMOC, sort of the basically big flow current that runs through the mid-Atlantic, collapse of critical Atlantic current is no longer low likelihood, study finds. Scientists say shocking discovery shows rapid cuts in carbon emissions are needed to avoid catastrophic fallout. The tipping point, AMOC shutdown is basically the plot of Day After Tomorrow, and it would be extremely bad for Europe. The climate in the UK would become like Newfoundland's, and it would the amount of food we could produce would drop through the floor. It would be absolutely catastrophic for a sizable chunk of the population of Europe, and we would have to go other places, which would be interesting, wouldn't it? Time for us to do some migration elsewhere. A thing that I also talk about in the book, but if we have an AMOC collapse, the scale of catastrophe is kind of unfathomable at this point. Now, does anyone remember where I was being interviewed years and years ago, 2020, about the Stonehaven, the climate crash, and one of the things I talked about was climate change, and people were shouting, "What's climate change got to do with this? How dare you use this as an excuse to just talk about climate change?" A study has pointed out that the extreme rain linked to the Stonehaven train derailment will become more common due to climate change, which is exactly the point that many of us, including you watching, were making when that happened. So, so climate change isn't just something that's scary. The scariest impacts are becoming more likely and getting closer, and the actual impacts materially are now, and indeed a decade ago or 5 years ago, and getting more frequent. Now, an interesting little item. This one, the Scottish Government has been urged to scrap first-class travel on ScotRail, and I've had a couple of you asking me about this, going, "Oh, what about this? This looks interesting. What about this?" To which my response is, first class on certain routes, long-distance routes, fine. It does get used. In ScotRail, on ScotRail services, I am not sure there's any difference in quality of service other than you get a packet of crisps and a cup of tea in a paper cup between first class and regular. And more importantly, the data shows that first class in Scotland is most of the time completely empty. So just get rid of it. Just don't have first class in Scotland. You don't need it. You can have long distance services. What you could do is do a bit like Transport for Wales does, where you have like an executive service that is a local haul once or twice a day, and people can get on that if they want a nice experience. Fine. But for most trains in Scotland, you don't need first class. I don't know what it's offering. Just have a good catering service and everyone can get involved. So my view on this, there's no point to first class rail on current rail services in Scotland. Just don't need it. Get rid of it. Pointless. An interesting one. So Amtrak have finally launched the replacement, what are they? Avalia Horizon units, the Liberty. No, not Horizon, they're Liberty ones. The Liberty sets, basically. What you're looking at now is basically a relative of the original TGV. That's what that is, to all intents and purposes. The long way around via... Well, I tell you what, give me a second. I'll get to my point. But they have launched it, 160 mile an hour Acela replacement trains. The challenge they've got at the moment is... Well, lots of challenges, but they are, and this is publicly available information, you can go out and find out that the challenges are a lot to do with approvals and validation of the tilting system. It's all about gauging, everyone. Among other things, vehicle dynamics is a key part of this. So the trains can't run as fast as they need to run the faster timetables and get those capacities up. Lots of challenges, all to do with dynamic modelling and all sorts of fun stuff that we talked about before in Railnatter, but we could probably talk about even more again. Fascinating little story. What's also quite interesting, though, is the story and the relationship of this train, which tilts, to preceding tilting trains and what technology the different tilting trains use. What's quite fun is that this train that you can see right now owes a direct tilting train lineage to the advanced passenger train. So did Britain give the US tilting trains? Well, no, we didn't first, but the current Liberty fleet uses tilting technology that owes a significant debt to the boffins in Derby in the 1960s, which, funnily enough, is exactly what we're going to explore for next week's episode, where we're going to be talking about tilting trains, and I'll be a delight to do so. Yes, tilting trains, their history and the relationship, well, not a full history, but basically the story of tilting train technologies and their relationship to the advanced passenger train. That should be a fun one. Tonight's bonus for those subscribing to the £5 and above tiers, tonight's bonus will be a little sneak peek at the National Rail Awards. I'll walk around, do a video, come outside where there's phone signal and attempt to put it on YouTube and then make it available via Patreon. So yeah, that should be fun. Go and watch that. Momentarily that'll go out at 9:30. In the meantime, it only remains for me to give you a big wave for a bit of a hastily and disjointed episode, but hopefully something that's interesting in there, some things for you to pick up, and there are so many guest episodes lined up that I've not had the headspace to organise, but that things are getting a bit softer towards the end of this month, I hope. Today is just an absolute classic example of that not being the case, but yeah, anyway, I digress. Basically, I'm waffling. Everyone, I'll see you next week for a live episode. Do come and join for that. In the meantime, cheerio!